take it away.
Okay, do you want to introduce Julianne too?
Why don't you do that?
Okay, great.
Yeah. I'm going to say, and special guests.
Yeah, right. That's jargony.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you here. I'm Ken Jacobson, the Forum programmer. And first of all, welcome to our session, Call to Action, an interactive workshop from the AFI DOCS Impact Lab. Second of all, I'm going to ask if we maybe could move in a little closer, because we have a great group, but kind of a nice, intimate group. So if you wouldn't mind moving in, come on, don't be shy. Yeah, fill in some of these seats, if you don't mind. Come on. All right. Okay. Or stay where you are. That's fine too. I also just one announcement, which is following this workshop, starting at 3:30, from 3:30 to 5:30 this afternoon, and then also tomorrow and Sunday, we have our VR showcase, which is happening in that glass walled-in area, and then we have other projects. More interactive projects. We have one in this conference room and two downstairs. So be sure to stick around for that as well. And a number of those projects are, have an impact focus as well. So I think if you're interested in this panel, you will be interested in some of those projects. So enough of announcements. We're really thrilled that this was the 4th year of the Impact Lab, correct? And so it's become a real fixture here at AFI DOCS. And one of my sort of personal goals was always to take some of the gems from the workshop and incorporate some of the highlights into the forum. So this year we're making that happen, and that's all thanks to Heidi Nel, who is the principal at the Raben Group. So Heidi, thank you so much, and I know she has some special guests joining her, who she will introduce. So take it away, Heidi. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you. Hello. Friday afternoon. Who's excited? Woo! All right. Hi, everyone. My name, as Ken said, is Heidi Nel. I am a principal at the Raben Group, where I lead our social impact entertainment practice area. So what that means is I have the pleasure of working with artists and filmmakers and storytellers and change makers who want to use the power of narrative to create change in the world. And being uniquely situated here in Washington, D.C., we have an interesting opportunity to reach decision makers in a way that people in other parts of the world don't. And so what we're going to do over the next hour today is we won't be able to do what we did in 48 hours in the 2-day Impact Lab this week. But I want to share the framework that we use in the impact work that's based around the Fledgling Fund Impact Workbook. And so my colleague Charlie over here, Charlie Crocker, who is also at the Raben Group, he's going to distribute these impact workbooks. And then if you need a pen, if you don't have a pen, we're actually going to we're going to use them in the next hour. So just raise your hand or let us know, and we'll be sure to get you in. You need a pen? Super. Thanks, Ken. I also have a couple of special guests. So one of those special guests is Charlie Crocker. Charlie and I have run and produced the Impact Lab together for the past 3 years. And then another special guest that we are lucky to have with us today is Julianne Dresner, the director of Personal Statement, which had its world premiere here at AFI DOCS on Wednesday night. How many people were able to go? Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. Julianne, do you want to come on up? Super. So what we're going to do is while you're getting the impact workbooks, and we'll walk you through those in about 20 minutes, but what I thought would be really fun to do is kind of give you an overview of what the lab is, and then we're going to spend a few minutes talking to Julianne. She is actually how would you say, a member or participant? You participate in the Fledgling Fund's Engagement Lab, which is a year-long program for select filmmakers who aim to make social impact and create change through films. And the Fledgling Lab inspired the Impact Lab, and it was also one of our first funders. So it enabled us to get it off the ground 4 years ago when Michael Lumpkin and I created it. Yeah, so we thought it'd be great to talk to Julianne, and then we're going to dive in, and you're going to get to work on your own projects. And my colleague Charlie and I are here to help, so we'll get to that a little bit later on. Okay, so quickly, next slide, please. I just want to give you all a really quick overview of the Impact Lab. The reason we created this is, well, broadly stated, we wanted to beef up the knowledge economy. There are lots of advocates and NGOs and policy wonks, especially here in Washington, who have a lot of the answers that storytellers need to make sure that audiences create or take actions following their films that have lasting impact. And we want to be a bridge to connect those different constituencies, so creative people, storytellers, filmmakers, with advocates, NGOs, policy folks who are, doing the day in, day out work, not through story, to solve some of these issues. For that same reason, we think there's an opportunity to maximize impact in creating that bridge. We also want to give people access to opportunities. So in my day job, I get hired to do this work for people. But if you think about who in the audience, quick show of hands, rides a bicycle. Does anybody ride a bike? Now think back to many moons ago before you rode the bike and you were learning how to ride a bike. Do you remember that first moment when you got it? You finally got balance. And balance is this phenomenon that makes it possible for you to keep riding that bike for the rest of your life. Even if you don't ride it for 10 years, you can get back on and do it pretty easily. And so the sort of impetus for this lab was to create an environment for people that would give them the tools they need to better understand how to maximize impact. So whether they're able to hire a professional like myself or others in the field who do this work, that they could actually do it somewhat themselves and further the impact that they have. And then we think there's an opportunity to expand funding. So being here in Washington, I see people write checks to super PACs and NGOs often, and they should continue to do that. But I think if those same people writing checks understood the power of film to catalyze action, to catalyze impact, that there might be a new pool of funding available for filmmakers and storytellers in the impact space as well. So that's a little bit about the lab. Next slide, please. Quick overview, it's 2.5 days. The filmmakers who participate spend, 10 hours a day? Very long days, soaking up lots of information. This year we had 5 films participate. Each film brings 2 representatives. One of those representatives does need to be a filmmaker. And so we had 10 participants this year. And over the course of 2.5 days, we did 6 trainings, 1 event, 1 trip to Capitol Hill with multiple meetings with different congressional offices, and then we had 14 speakers, trainers, and issue area experts in and out. So we don't have issue area experts per se here today to work with us, but we're going to show you how to connect with them and get the information that you might need down the road. All right, next slide, please. Okay, any questions quickly? We want this to be interactive, so raise your hand if you have a question. You don't need to wait to the end. Do folks have any questions about what the lab is before we dive in with Julianne? Yes?
A question about the films that were included. Were those all feature-length documentaries?
No, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. There was a short film included this year called Brother, a 20-minute film about a U.S. Army captain whose life was saved by his Afghan translator while he was serving in war. And we actually, and another important point, sorry, Julianne, we actually really pride ourselves and our team and our methodology and our commitment to meritocracy. And so we put together a selections committee every year. The selections committee is never named, so those people, remain private. And we have a scoring system based on the issue, the application that people submit, the relevancy in this moment in time, how we think it could spur impact, and then we make our selections in the lab based on that, but we are also very cognizant of diversity because we're big believers that there is strength in diversity, both in age, gender, race, type of film, stories represented, type of storytelling. So we do have a strong commitment to that.
You've invited VR before, right?
Yes, we had a,
One of our VR filmmakers.
oh, excellent. Yes, we did have a VR project last year. Thanks, Ken. Thank you for asking that. Okay, Julianne. You've had a big week. How are you feeling?
I'm overwhelmed, but really so excited about, the impact, I just have to say, the Impact Lab was an incredible resource and opportunity for us, and I'm happy to talk about many of the things that came out of it. The combination of having our world premiere right after the Impact Lab, I think, multiplied the impact of the Impact Lab. So it's been amazing.
Okay, so I want to dive in. Let's back up a little bit. How did you know that when you set out to make personal statement, did you know that people were running these impact campaigns already? Were you thinking about what type of campaign that you could run tied to the film to actually make long-term change?
I am a filmmaker because I'm interested in social justice and making change through film. And so I usually, my films are generally always about some kind of a social justice issue, and I make character-based films that will enable folks who may not have a personal experience with that issue to really be able to understand it and relate to it and care about it. So I did go into this film with that same intention. So I did go in interested in educational inequality and wanting to make a film about that. And when I learned about the young people who are the subjects of personal statement, and that there were young people in high schools who were working as college counselors in their schools because there is not enough college guidance support in their schools, and they want to go to college. Everyone else in their school wants to go to college, but they really need more resources to get there. I thought this was a perfect starting point to be able to understand the systemic barriers that are keeping so many low-income students from achieving a college degree. So it was a starting point from the very beginning. But we had to go through a process of crystallizing our social change goals for the impact campaign. And of course, I learned so much from the Impact Lab. And one of the things I learned was that we really need to work off of our film. We need to look at, what are the goods that we have? What is the tool that we have in our film? And we have many, and then we also had to make choices about what are the ones that we can focus on and build the impact campaign around, where we might be able to
Affect change.
really affect change.
This is a great point. So one thing that I see a lot as a practitioner in this field is that people have a beautiful story, and then they have this idea for how they want to change the world, and then they try to think about, okay, what kind of campaign can I have, or what call to action can I have for audiences at the end to fulfill my goal for social change that actually isn't really a natural flow from the film. So first and foremost, you bring up a great point. When you have finished your film and you're starting to think about your impact campaign, you want to think, if I'm an audience member and I just saw this story, what's the most natural extension of this story? What's a thing that I can do that has to do with the story I just saw? So Julianne has her outcome map with her. We're going to work on something today called an outcome map. If you go to page 6 in your Fledgling Fund workbook, Charlie's going to walk you through this in a little bit, but Fledgling Fund created this a few years ago. We use it in the work that we do. I also teach. I'm an adjunct at Duke University. I use this with the students that I work with. So we're going to get to work on our outcome map today, but Julianne has hers with her. Julianne, can you tell us We're going to start with the end in mind. Has anybody read those Steve Covey books? 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. Yes, I see nods. Chapter 1, start with the end in mind. That's what we're going to do here, folks. Can you tell us the outcome or your intended outcome and sort of goal for social change through your film?
So our intended outcome is to encourage students to persist to college and to close the college guidance gap by building more support for more college guidance in low-income public schools.
Great. So that's a pretty lofty goal, and that's okay. You can make your goal very lofty. The really sort of the meat and potatoes of this exercise and thinking through your impact campaign are identifying what are the intermediate outcomes, what are the things that have to happen right before that goal can be real or that vision can be realized. So Julianne, can you dive into your 3 intermediate outcomes for your campaign?
So the first would be that there are more low-income students who are entering and graduating from college.
Okay.
The second is that we would close the college guidance gap. There would be more support for increasing the number of guidance counselors, but also college counselors, because they're not the same. Not everyone knows that most public schools have guidance counselors and don't have any college counselors, and it's the guidance counselors who are asked to do the work of college counseling. And I'm just going to throw this in here. The average guidance counselor to student ratio in the country is 1 to 490. And those guidance counselors say that they can spend about 22% of their time on college counseling. So that gives you a sense of the extent of the current college guidance gap that we have. So we also want to encourage build support for more youth-led college access programs, which is the model that you see in the film. And then our third outcome is that there would be more support to replicate existing best practices that eliminate the systemic barriers that exist that are keeping many low-income students from being able to go to and graduate from college.
Great. Okay, so I have known Julianne for about 3 weeks in person. Yeah, 3 weeks. What I know about Julianne in just those 3 weeks is that she is highly ambitious, highly committed, stops at nothing, turns over every stone, and is like hungry to make the type of change she just outlined. Now, she is an incredible human being, but that doesn't make her a better or a worse person. And so one thing that I always tell people when they're setting out to make their campaign plans is you need to pick what's right for you. Right, you have 24 hours in a day unless somebody has some magical pill, and then come find me afterwards because I'd like some. So 24 hours in a day and X amount, like finite resources. You can pick all 3 of those things, and I have no doubt in my mind that you're going to get those things accomplished. Or you can pick one thing and say, you know what, I think I can really make a difference here. So I'm going to home in on this one thing where I think I can raise X amount of support or resources to be able to affect that. So I say all that to say there's no right or wrong, there's no better or worse, there's no judgment. You have to pick and design something that works for you and your life. Okay, so peeling back the onion a little bit further, through this backwards mapping, Julianne just outlined 3 really clear, really ambitious but also possible intermediate outcomes. Can you take us to the next phase? Mm-hmm. What needs to happen through your campaign to see those happen in life more generally?
Right. So it gets a little murky here. I have to say we're still in the process of designing this impact campaign, and we're in the phase right now where we're trying to find out who are all the key stakeholders, who are the folks in the world who are already working on this, who we should be talking to, who we should be partnering with. One thing that I've learned through the lab is that I should get a tattoo that says, "I am not a nonprofit." and I cannot do any of this alone. And even with my team, with the film team, we cannot do this on our own. And that we need to partner with organizations that have ongoing campaigns doing this work. So we know the tools we need to support all of the activities that we want to pursue towards these ends, that we need engagement toolkits with lesson plans, discussion guides targeted at each of our key audiences for the film and for this work. We know that we're going to use our website to provide a lot of important information and resources, but the actual activities that will use all of those tools include community screenings. We want to reach students, parents, educators, and decision makers. And we want to also focus on on policy forums. We want to bring the film to those places where the key decision makers are already convening. And we also want to build bridges use the film whenever possible to build bridges between universities and the low-income students and the public schools in their area. So we have a lot of ideas, and we're still refining it, yeah.
That's great. And one important thing that I want to underscore there is that Julianne was pretty specific about who her target audience was. And she was specific about who the target audience was against each activity that she mentioned. So that's something we're going to dive into in a few minutes as well. Okay, Julianne, this has been incredibly insightful. Congratulations. Actually, before I let you go, I do want to ask you one question. I know you also had a briefing with some of your funders yesterday. How has this framework, how have funders sort of consumed or reacted to this framework? Is this helpful when you're seeking funding? Would you use something else when you're seeking funding? Do you have any general guidance or information there?
You mean how has the outcome map been helpful? I mean, it's been incredibly helpful to sort of have a framework to work off of, but it's quite clear from the even the initial conversations that we've been having. It's clear, not just funders, but sort of the advocates working in this area, that there is interest in using the film. So that's really heartening. And from the funders, it does seem like there's interest in partnering to do this. And things are definitely, every conversation is leading me to go back to the plan and revise it, and it's a work in progress for sure.
Okay, good. All right, does anybody have any questions for Julianne before we transition into the interactive components? Yes.
I have a question about when you say choosing your audience, because one challenge sometimes is managing expectations of filmmaker with reality bringing audience. So if your audience, do you see that audience in terms of quantitative or qualitative? Because, for example, if you have 50 people in the room and there are 52 of those people can do something really amazing for you versus 500 people in the room, and maybe everyone gets caught. So how do you manage your own expectations around those goals?
Well, on one hand, we want to maximize access, and we're really excited that the film is going to have a national PBS broadcast because we want to maximize access to one of our priority audiences, which is students, young people, and it is quantity. But then, in terms of the quality, it's also about who's in the room. And one thing that has really been crystallized from this experience of being in the lab and then coming to AFI DOCS and having our premiere and having all three of our main subjects be part of the panel discussion following the screening, we really want the entire impact campaign to be youth-led. It's unfortunate even that I'm alone here on the stage right now and I'm not with the subjects of the film. But in the same way that the film profiles a program that is youth-led, we want the impact campaign to be youth-led. And we want to have the young people be in the room with the decision makers so that they are able to participate and lead the reform that needs to happen because they really are the experts.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. All right, can we have a round of applause for Julianne? Congratulations. for joining us.
Leave that here.
I'm going to give you, good? All right.
Good, thank you.
All right, and next slide, please. Oh, great, next slide. We can, yeah, perfect. Okay, so sort of quick look at creating impact through film. So in issue advocacy campaigns, these are not constituent-specific audiences, but sort of broader audiences. I like to boil it down to two. Who are our grass tops audiences? And by grass tops, I mean, who are the decision makers? Who are the people that if they decide something goes a different way, it'll go that different way quickly? And then who are the grassroots? Both of these audiences, and the grassroots are individual, the grassroots are people-powered, the grassroots are what our country is, or at least supposed to be founded upon, democracy. We all get a say in how this works. So both of these audiences sort of propel each other in film impact campaigns, and both of them are really important, and it's even more important that you understand, and not just understand, but identify who your specific audiences are within the grass tops community and the grassroots community. Next slide, please. So in electoral campaigns, who here has voted at least once in life? I hope everyone. The electoral campaigns are about targeting individual voters. We need individual voters to get out and go vote. Issue campaigns. These are often about targeting office holders, elected officials, policymakers, and then, we're talking about policy here because we're in Washington and that's the most obvious fit, but that can also be if you're running a campaign to change the heart or mind of a corporate decision maker. For film impact campaigns, you really need both of those audiences. So it's about targeting change makers, so the grass tops, by galvanizing grassroots supporters through a clear call to action that collectively can create meaningful, lasting impact. So with film impact campaigns, we're focusing on both of those audiences, and they'll take different actions. Okay, next slide, please. I often use this example. Many years ago, I worked with the filmmakers behind the Oscar-nominated film, The Invisible War. And when we were mapping out our campaign, which was a pretty impactful and successful campaign by a number of different measures, it was important that we knew where our grass tops targets were. So the filmmakers very clearly had a goal to change policy. So they wanted the policy change around the way that sexual assault in the military was being addressed. They wanted a policy change. But then they also wanted the culture to change for people in the military who were being impacted by sexual assault. And those are two different targets. So the people in the blue are the grass tops decision makers who can change the policy. But the people in the brown are the grass tops decision makers who can actually make sure that that policy is implemented. And so if we wanted to fully realize both of those goals, we had to understand who we were targeting for what and when. Okay, next slide, please. We cannot build a campaign without movement leaders. It doesn't make sense. Again, you don't have the hours in a day, the money in your budget to be able to build something truly impactful without ensuring that it's a movement-led, or a movement, I won't say movement-led, but a movement-aligned campaign. And how do we develop campaigns that have the insight and the wisdom of movement leaders? We connect with movement leaders and find out what it is that they're doing and what their change strategy is. And sometimes I use Tarana Burke as an example, A, because she's extraordinary, but B, because Tarana Burke's probably not going to be available for you to call and say, hey, tell me about your change strategy. But she works for Girls for Gender Equity, and somebody on her team might be available to talk to you about it. So you will probably see when you're thinking through who should I even start talking to about this to better understand the lay of the land, look to see who you're watching on TV, whose work are you reading, who's like really shaping that narrative out there, and then look and see where they work, who they're working with, what organizations are at the rallies or the events that they're speaking at, and then get in touch with those organizations and see if you can have conversations to get a better sense of the environment. Okay, next slide. Charlie, are you ready? Great. Do you want to come on up? I like showing this slide. Oh, the end got cut off. Bummer. I think sometimes as creators and visionaries and people who are idealists, I'm an idealist, but my work forces me to be a realist. We have a tendency to, think that, oh, I told an inspiring story and that's going to change the world. Nope. Feelings are fleeting. So how many people were inspired by something earlier this week? I was inspired by 10 things earlier this week. How many people were uninspired when their alarm clock went off this morning? I was. That was not an inspiring moment for me. So you want to connect with somebody at the moment that they're inspired, and that's usually at the end of your film or when they're watching your film. And in that very moment, you want to give them an action to take so that you can translate that inspiration into action in the moment that it's occurring for people. And that's what we call, that's the bridge, and that's what we refer to as the call to action. That call to action is not something that you're going to come up with today, most likely, if you're doing your workbook today, but it's one of the most important parts of a successful film impact campaign. Okay, next slide, please. Great. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Charlie, who is going to lead you through this next session.
Great. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, Julianne, for going over sort of the overview of what an impact campaign can look like. We're so glad you guys are here so that we can do a little bit of hands-on, get thinking about the things that have been covered, have it apply to the films that you guys are working on and the change that you're creating. So these next few slides are all pages that are in your workbook that you have. If you don't have a copy of the workbook, I think there are some floating around in the back still.
Can you raise your hand if you need a copy and don't have one? Oh, and for anybody tuned in on Facebook Live, you can get this on the Fledgling Fund website. It's the Impact Workbook. And then everybody in the audience can get it.
So together we're going to work on just a few pages here, but the workbook itself is a 20-page document with lots of thoughtful questions, little pages to fill out, all of which is going to sort of inform and make you think hard about what your campaign can be. It's a great tool to, as mentioned earlier, it's a great tool to dilute things down into one specific goal. Obviously, we all want to change the world, and we all are capable of changing the world in so many different ways. But to try to do it all at once is going to leave you only getting a little step ahead. Creating measurable change through film is very doable, as long as you're honing in on those things that you can do. An example that we like to look at a few years ago, one of the impact films in the lab, was a film called Salam Neighbor, which looked at the refugee crisis. These filmmakers stayed in the refugee camps right outside of Syria, and they didn't end up solving the refugee crisis, as it turns out. But their film is still making measurable change today by helping thousands of individual refugees get relocated and get assimilated into their communities. So there is real change that's happening, and they were able to use this map to sort of get there. So together, let's look at these questions here on the screen on pages 4 and 5 in your book. Oh, great. Yes. Pause. We're actually going to take 5 minutes to work with, if your film partner is here, if your impact producer is here, or if you're here by yourself, take a look at these questions that are on the slide here and in your workbook.
On page 4.
And start jotting down some of the thoughts that you have, some of the answers that you have for these questions. Heidi and I are going to be walking around over the next 5 minutes. If you have specific questions and want to ask us, we are happy to help. But let's just take 5 minutes to take what you've learned over the last half hour and apply it to these questions. Ready, set, go.
Should we say it again? For anybody who's tuning, audience here physically, keep working for one more minute. For anybody who's joining us on Facebook Live, this workbook is available to you too. If you go to the Fledgling Fund the Fledgling Fund website, which I believe is www.fledglingfund.org, it will have a tab with resources on it. And in the resources section, there is something called the Fledgling Fund Impact Workbook. And the Impact Workbook is available to be downloaded there. This is the entire workbook. In this session, we're going to be working off of pages 4 through 6, but there are 20 pages in total. Next slide. And then we're ready for the next slide. Thank you.
All right, so hopefully that was in time to get some thoughts flow in. You may not be entirely finished, but that is totally fine. We encourage you to take this home, think hard about it, use it on the train, use it when you're outlining your campaign, answer the questions, et cetera, et cetera. Let's jump over to page 6. So if you turn the page in your workbook, you will be greeted with your own outcome map. So as mentioned earlier, the outcome map is designed to have you think backwards, thinking with the end in mind. It's easy to think about what we want to do whenever, right after you have your premiere, you want to have some screenings, you want to get it online, you want to do this. But it's thinking about what those things are ultimately going to do. So thinking with the end in mind is a great way to sort of outline that. We had one of our filmmakers during the lab put it in a way that I think would resonate well. It's about thinking, storyboarding your campaign. So when you have your cards with your characters, what are each of these characters saying? When you're putting these characters into a scene, how are these scenes coming together? When you put all of your scenes together in a 90-minute series, what does your film become? Basically, your impact goal is going to be sort of your ultimate film. So if that's a helpful way to look at it. I would love to hear if anyone has any specific goals that they have as sort of what their vision for a campaign is that you're willing to share right away.
Sorry. So we're going to jumping in quickly, teamwork, dreamwork. So now that you've answered some of those initial questions, you're going to flip over to page 6. And you're actually going to put pen to paper and write down what your end goal for social change is. So the questions before were designed to get you thinking about what that might be. So it's asking, like, what's the status quo? If nothing was done, what would life look like, right? Like, this is the problem that we're trying to combat. But now you're going to take a few minutes and start to jot down, 1 or 2 sentences that are your vision for social change. Some people in the audience might be really cerebral, and so maybe you want to make it super specific and timely. Other people are much more kind of heart-led or visionary, and so if you want to make it big and broad, that's okay too. But just start to put pen to paper and give language to what your goal for change is.
And then we'll ask you what you come up with.
And then we'll ask you to share.
So take another 3 to 4 minutes right now to start thinking about that.
All right, and we're gonna jump back in here. And then team, can we move to the next slide?
So we wanted to share an example of one of the other films that was in the Impact Lab last year, a film called For Akeem, which looks at basically underprivileged youth in the St. Louis area and sort of the expulsion and suspension rates that people are dealing with, gun violence in the cities that they're dealing with.
The preschool to prison pipeline, which is very real in many places in the U.S., but specifically where this film was documented.
So they had a few specific social change goals. Raise the criminal responsibility statewide, raise the age of the criminal responsibility statewide, reform school discipline policies and mental health services relating to trauma, and reduce juvenile incarceration rates. So those are three very specific things that through their film they are able to achieve. That they're working to achieve. Yeah. The campaign is ongoing. But through some recent conversations with them, they did just talk to us about how this outcome map really has been the roadmap by keeping this end in mind of how they're working to get there through specific tactics and the intermediate outcomes, the short-term outcomes. So it is a tool that is still being used by them as they walk down this road. So let's take another minute.
Well, and then can you just go to the next slide? So we just wanted to share with you. So those were their sort of broad goals or the things that they wanted to achieve in the campaign. And so again, you can see in their end goal for social change, and I invite folks to choose one end goal for social change, but they too were very ambitious, so they had these three. So they mapped it out on the top. This was their, top social change goal, raising the age of the criminal responsibility statewide, and the two other goals that Charlie just mentioned. And then you can see how their intermediate outcomes fed up to those longer-term outcome goals. So yeah, if that inspires anything else, if folks want to take one more minute and just jot down any new thoughts around their social change goal, then we'll come back in 1 minute and ask a few people to share.
Alrighty. So we've had a couple of minutes to write down some of these goals. Do we have any brave souls that are willing to share? If you can just say your name, a brief sort of synopsis of your film, just a quick log line,
Yeah.
And then what that goal is, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Riley Dowd, and the film I'm working on is called Dreams of Dara, and it follows a young Syrian refugee mother, first in Jordan's Zatri camp, and then back to Syria to look for her missing husband, and then ultimately to Europe. Okay. So this is really rough, but I wrote, support Syrian refugee and internally displaced women who have become the primary breadwinners of their households because their husbands, fathers, brothers are either missing, injured, fighting, or imprisoned. And in doing so, raise awareness about the Syrian regime's enforced disappearances and kidnappings of hundreds of thousands of people without ever providing family members with information on the fate or whereabouts of their loved ones.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I know we have bold people in the audience. Any takers? Any takers? Yes.
My name is Jane Murago Munene. I'm from Kenya. And I'll talk about a film I did called The Price of a Daughter. And the price of a daughter is about female genital mutilation. And so my end goal was total eradication of FGM. And the immediate outcomes that we were looking for were an increase of the girl child enrollment in schools, because lack of education is part of it. Then we're looking for reduction in FGM and a better informed community of the dangers of FGM.
That's perfect. Do you want to lead this session? Is there anybody else who wants to share? Don't be shy, folks. This is an interactive workshop. Yes, in the back row. And then I'm coming to the front row.
95% of all criminal cases are plea bargained out, which gives the justice system, meaning the district attorneys, the ability to overcharge criminals. And their choices essentially are, you can serve 20 years doing something here, or take your chances at the jury. And so by adding to the charges, they make plea bargaining a more palatable opportunity for the defendant, even if somebody is not actually guilty of the crime. Because why would you say, oh, if I'm guilty of this one, it's a 2-year sentence. I could be sentenced to 20 years. I guess I'll just take the 2 years. And then they get caught in the criminal justice system, and suddenly we look like it's the follow-up to For Hakeem.
Are you working on a project? Did you do an end goal for social change that you want to share?
Mostly it's, I was going to say, I didn't write this one down here in this phrase, but it is to put the criminal justice system back in the hands of the jury system.
Great, thank you. And then up front. Oh, and we're just going to give you the microphone so folks tuning in can hear you as well.
Oh, and the microphone.
Thank you.
Okay. The project that I'm working on is called Momma Rising, and it is about the history of Black midwives in D.C. and the forces that eradicated them.
And what's your name?
Oh, Tanya.
Thanks, Tanya.
Tanya, I'm sure. And my end goal is to have all 50 states, all U.S. territories, and D.C. Recognize certified professional midwives and have all health benefits and insurances cover the services that they provide, whether they be in a hospital, at home, or in a birth center.
That's
great.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Tanya, I'm just curious, you didn't have to do this already. Did you take a stab at intermediate outcomes?
Intermediate outcomes, just one. Just one. Through the film to raise awareness about the history of the midwives and sort of like the regulations that moved them into basically annihilation. And also to, I'm also thinking about the disparities in maternal health as well, and the importance of the home birth midwives and certified midwives who have traditionally been Black midwives who are missing, and that is the population that has the worst birth outcomes, Black women in the city. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So raise awareness. Yeah, raise awareness about those things. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Yes. So on the intermediate outcomes, these are basically, these are the building blocks that get you to this end goal. So these are the things that once whenever started with these tactical elements, you have some pieces in play. How do these all come together to ultimately build this sort of final house? So when you look at For Hakeem, the things that play into their final goals, one of the intermediate outcomes, empower juveniles in disadvantaged communities about justice system and their rights. Better informed superintendents, educators, judges, and state-level legislators. Raise cultural awareness about the prevalence of juvenile expulsion and detention due to zero-tolerance policies. So these are sort of the more, they're a little more measured. They're outcomes that come from various tactics that when combined together, you can get to these ultimate changes. So take a couple minutes to draw this out. So we'll take a couple minutes to work on these intermediate outcomes. Think the way to think about it is what things need to happen in order for your final change to happen.
And what things need to happen and be realized right before that final change can happen. Because there are a lot of things that need to happen, but what are those like sort of intermediate pieces that would lead to your end game?
Okay, hopefully that was enough time to get started on some of their intermediate outcomes. Is there someone that is willing to share what they wrote down for their intermediate outcomes? Yes, no, maybe? Not all at once.
Everyone look away. We also know, can you go to the next slide, please? We know that, right, some of these are, you might not just have the answers off the top of your head. Oh, sorry, one more slide. And so what we do in our campaigns is we really rely on the experts, right? And what we do in the Impact Lab is we pair filmmakers with people who are issue area experts, so they can come in and say, like, this is what's missing, or if this were in place, or if this law were passed, or if people better understood X, then this problem would be solved. So we have this picture up here of Elise Hogue, the head of NARAL, and Cecile Richards, the former head of Planned Parenthood of America. And if you go to, what page is the partner page on? If you go to page 8, or sorry, not page 8.
11.
Page 11 in your impact workbook, there's a great grid. You can, use these columns and categories to create like a Google spreadsheet so you can keep updating it. But there's a great grid here that gives you some framework on what types of things to ask people, gives you a way to keep that information organized, gives you a great example of how to answer one of those questions. But our initial point, while Elise and Cecile Richards might not be available to hop on the phone with you and tell you about, the way our women's reproductive rights are under attack in America, they certainly have staff. And in our experience, people are usually willing to hop on the phone for about 20 minutes and answer some pretty specific questions. Or if you, like Tanya, already have a pretty good idea of what needs to happen, what those intermediate outcomes are, we really encourage folks to seek out those issue area experts as well and sort of float it by them, share with them what you're up to, ask them, because they might be able to provide some constructive criticism that helps you tighten up your strategy.
They may have already been looking for you as well. Films are a wonderful tool to tell the story that these folks are already telling, so they'll be grateful to be talking to you as well. So I'd encourage everyone to take 15, 20 minutes, do your Googles, type in your issues, and sort of see what these top 10 organizations are. Shoot them an email, jump on the phone, and you'll be amazed at the generosity of people in this space.
Everybody's welcome to stay here and keep working on the impact workbook. We have a few minutes left in this session. We want to check in and see, do folks have questions? Are there things that you were hoping we would get to that we didn't get to? I know there's a lot of ground to cover, and we picked the things that we feel are most essential, and then gave you the workbook for the rest. But we'd love to hear if you have questions or answer anything else. Yes?
I'd just love to share.
Oh, we need you to have the microphone.
I'd just really love to share, first of all, thank you, because I know this is one of those things that, especially when you're in the kind of production planning phases of a project, you are kind of mystified about that end goal. And so it does help crystallize not only your stakeholders, but the direction maybe that you want to go with in a story. But for me, one of these questions that I answered really got me thinking about where could I put all of my eggs in one basket and make the most impact, and it was not the place I thought. And that was really very enlightening and eye-opening to me. So the questions that you posed and just spending a few minutes reflecting and thinking about it caused me to realize, I work in the educational space, and you would think it would be teachers who have day-to-day access to students, but in fact, maybe that's not the one and only place, and I need to expand my reach beyond that, to parents, to legislators, and to other kinds of spaces. So I appreciate that, because this is a challenging thing for someone who's new to impact, and we hear a lot about getting impact producers involved, and I can't even articulate what my vision is, right. So this will help me do that. So thank you, and thank you for bringing this to us.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing and for the work that you're doing.
Hi, my name is Dianela. I am producing a historical documentary right now, nothing to do with what we are doing today, but this has been very helpful to make me put in perspective an issue that has been bothering me for many years, and I think I finally saw it with clarity how it can be articulated, so I really appreciate it. But my question is, many filmmakers go to a story through a character first. You get the character, and sometimes that person may not represent the issue or the idea you want to work with. And sometimes you go from the top. This is what I want to work. Let me find then the person of the character that will help me to tell the story. I don't know which way is better, or what is your experience, how people usually manage that?
Ooh, that's a great question, and a great question for a director. Is there... because you're asking more specifically about the story composition and what type of character to follow to best tell your story, is there somebody in the audience who I am not a director. I am what one would call an impact producer. Is there somebody in the audience that could speak to that? Anyone?
I work with a collaborative team, but yeah. I work with a collaborative team on a project about Indigenous rights and deciding carbon change policy. So it's a pretty difficult issue. And we've had to switch characters because we needed to look for someone who really represented someone who was going to be able to step up and talk to policymakers and actually connect from the grassroots to the grass tops. So that was something that we actually had to switch gears in order to be able to hopefully now have an impact campaign that's going to work. So I can definitely speak to that. And if you care about impact and that's your number one goal, I would say start really thinking about that if you haven't started your film yet, because you don't want to get in over your head. And like you were saying in the beginning, have a film that doesn't align with the impact you want to make.
That's great, thank you. And I just want to add one quick thing too. We also encourage people to document and tell the story without having an impact campaign written out. I think what's so powerful about film and about story is narrative transportation. It's a real thing that happens to people when they engage with a story that is well told. They transport out of their current environment into the shoes of the characters in the story. And we don't want it to be a public service announcement, right? That's not going to change hearts and mind. So I love that answer that you're sharing too. And then I just want to provide the kind of other end of the spectrum, which is go with the most compelling characters. You had something to say as well, and then I'm going to turn it over to Julianne Dresner, who's a great director too.
Yeah, I think both on the impact campaign side and in the creating the story, that some of the people that are going to be the most helpful are going to come from the most unsuspecting places. So when you think that you have a logical partner, whatever, say in this certain organization, but when you get on the phone with them, they're not interested. Someone from the exact other side of the spectrum, politically or socially, may be completely interested. If I can share your experience on Capitol Hill, they were able to meet with someone on the very, very conservative side that arguably wouldn't be interested in this issue, and it led to an hour-long conversation about a very specific issue that this film is able to inform with a very great story. And the person whom would be the really logical from the neighborhood, went to the same schools growing up, was just a quick conversation with potential outcomes, but not like it wasn't what we expected. So I think always having your eyes wide open and being unassuming in your conversations, both with your cast and with your impact partners, you never really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I would just add that with documentary, even if you have an intention going in, and then you look for the subjects to work with who you think will be best for that intention, it's not scripted, and in the end, you may end up with many other stories and social issues, and that you end up with your footage, and that. With the example that Charlie is talking about, I wasn't thinking that a major goal of our campaign for this film should be simplifying the federal financial aid application process. But as it turned out, we found out that that might be one of the most practical things to pursue. And as it turns out, even though that wasn't our intention going in, to making this film, that's what Enoch, one of the main characters in the film, had to deal with. So, the film, you see from his perspective how difficult it was to get the documents he needed to complete that application, which is absolutely necessary for him to go to college. And it turns out, we have the goods on that in the film. And there are folks who are working on this issue to actually simplify the process, and so it seems like there might be some interest in using that. So it is really important. Casting and finding your partners and the people who will be the subject of your film is so critical, and yet it's also, you might find that there are you can't actually predict what your impact campaign is going to be going in with documentary.
Okay, well, we have to wrap up here, but we really appreciate everybody coming. My colleague Charlie and I are going to be around here for the next 15 minutes if you have specific questions for us. And then I just want to give a big thank you to the American Film Institute and AFI DOCS. Michael Lumpkin is, I think I speak for both of us, just one of our favorite humans on the planet. And when I pitched him this idea of creating sort of like a boot camp for filmmakers that focuses on advocacy and impact a few years ago, he was all in. And so we love AFI DOCS for their innovation and their commitment to support filmmakers and also to support social impact around the world. And then one last shout out is I gave the incorrect URL for the Fledgling Fund. So it's actually www.thefledglingfund.com. AFIDOCS.org. And then if you hit the tab for resources, the Impact Workbook and the electronic form is available there if you'd like to download it. And special thanks to Fledgling Fund for all their support of the community and for creating this workbook. We found it really impactful in our client work, in the Impact Lab, and teaching classes together. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a
y'all.
great festival.